Hello friends, I've been listening to some other creators talk about staying in your lane over the last few days, and I need to discuss some stuff with some fellow white people. And it's in this vein that I decided to write an essay about what's been going on recently, and especially how Roe v. Wade and the Buffalo massacre are intrinsically tied to white nationalism, and almost the same thought process went into both of those things. I'm going to go ahead and give you a length warning right now. This is very long, and it also is a bit of history lesson, but in order for us to finally understand some of the weirdness that is these ideas and conspiracy theories, you really have to understand where they got the information from to begin with. It's banana pants. Also, I hope you'll forgive the fact that this might sound a little robotic. I haven't actually done a speech that wasn't spontaneous in years, or hasn't been just memorized and screamed into the phone. So the first thing that we have to talk about is the Great Replacement and where that shit originated from, okay? You will not believe how crazy it is. I still don't believe how crazy it is, especially because Amy Coney Barrett herself cited the Great Replacement in her decision to help in overturning Roe v. Wade. So we're going to start with this guy named Maurice Barré. He was a French politician and author, and he came into popularity in the very beginning of the 1900s in France. He became very famous about his ideas in individualism and nationalism. He wrote about replacement theories, specifically with replacement to the white race in lieu of any other race, including Irish people, in many of his books. And he was all about nationalism and individualism. He also sprinkled a lot of fucking weird mysticism into his belief structures and his arguments. He's basically an old world QAnon, and he even believed he was the reincarnation of Joan of Arc. So then he died, right? And we thought, you know, hey, he's gonna go into obscurity, everything will be cool. His post and pre-World War I shit, you know, for the birds. It's fine now. We were wrong. Because this guy, Renard Camus, showed up and actually coined the phrase, Le Grand Replacement, in several speeches and in one of his books that he wrote right before running for president in 2010 and 2011 in France. I know we're talking about France a lot. I promise this will make sense in a moment. So anyway, Camus ran on an anti-immigration ticket, and he constantly cited the fact that he thought that immigrants were going to fuck up the population as far as white people were concerned. He commonly uses phrases, he's still alive, he commonly uses phrases like genocide by substitution. You see, Camus, and to some extent, Barré, both, used propaganda and all kinds of rhetoric based around anti-Semitic belief structures. The only difference between Camus and Barré as far as what they believed in was the fact that Camus had to change gears and go with the anti-Muslim rhetoric, because that's the kind of hate that white people were into in the early and mid-2000s. This guy Camus is such a nationalist, he will not print or write anything in anything other than French. So his work has been poorly translated and interpreted, but still translated and interpreted into far-right message boards that have reached the United States and have landed on QAnon boards and alt-right boards as well. But I'm pretty sure anyone who actually takes him seriously cannot begin to understand the irony in copying his nationalist work while not belonging to his nation. Americans copying French work and calling it theirs is the weirdest shit ever. But I digress, and we gotta keep going. So white nationalists, through all of this rhetoric from these French guys, right, they started believing in a few things that had to be true, right? They believed that whiteness was a culture. They believed that a lot of white people who aren't nationalists believe in something called Western ethno-masochism, and that they have to use these politicians and talking heads on the news in order to spark fear in people so that they can make sure that they're not replaced anymore. We're going to speed through how whiteness isn't a culture, okay? They believe that whiteness is a culture, but it's not. Your skin color doesn't determine your culture. Your culture is actually the social behavior, institutions, and norms that you exist in. And since the establishment of the colonized slave state of America, whiteness has been forced upon anyone who's immigrated into this country, including people who have the same complexion, but not the same cultural norms. All right. Socially othering anybody else who doesn't have the same puritanical natures that they do. The result is generations of people who found themselves not identifying with these norms, but having to live within them in order to not only keep their peace, but at times even their own lives, especially if they're not born white. In one sense, the expectation of oppression and othering is the only thing that can be considered white culture, due to the institutions and norms forced upon people in our society that we dwell within and under. The color of the skin isn't the culture, but the oppression is. So this sparks into the next point, which is that many white people believe in Western ethno-masochism. This is what alt-right people believe, okay? This is a term coined by many far-right people here in America that assumes that since we've had an awakening of oppression in our society and what we've committed to as a culture, that many white people desire to breathe themselves out of existence by either having interracial relationships and babies, but by also aborting perfectly good white babies. And this is the exact same fear-mongering belief that has been repeated time and time again by the alt-right and their talking heads in order to convince those who are white and scared that they're going to be othered if the society we live in is to change statistically and white people are somehow to become the minority in this country. So the insanity of this argument baffles me to my core, but it feels like what they're saying is that if white people do not want to oppress groups of other people in this country, then we must therefore hate ourselves to the point of extinction, which is provably untrue. Hating a culture of hierarchy, oppression doesn't equate to hating oneself, especially once those same people who don't hate themselves realize that their identity cannot intrinsically be linked to that specific culture of whiteness. In other words, you can hate white nationalism, colonization, oppression, and racism without wanting to perform genocide on an entire race of people. That is a nationalist and race purist way of thinking. They don't seem to understand that the way to solve a problem is not to eliminate an entire race, nor can they understand that no one is interested in such a horrific idea or way to solve a problem except them. I should also note here that the entire world has a lowered birth rate and lowered population due to COVID. And the idea of forcing any human life numbers to go up is from the same group of individuals who wouldn't stop a disease from killing people because of a few minor inconveniences is the most oxymoronic thing I have ever heard of in my life. But now here we are at the crux. The ideas are actually conspiracy theories, initially sparked in anti-Semitic and then anti-Muslim rhetoric, and it's now being used in order to not only pass bad policy to the people of this country, but also to spark fear in violent young men in order to push them to lash out at anyone they feel would be an easy target or weak. And we need to remember that whiteness does not equate to being an American. So the saddest part about all of this is that there are so many right-wing people in this country who genuinely believe that they're not also targets of these hate groups. But they are, because they exist as buffers repeating the same talking points over and over again, rather than helping us to have productive discourse about what is best for this country. And they believe that what they're doing, voting for, and saying are all for the greater good of a society in desperate need of progress over the puritanical controlling hierarchy that stands still today, as it did 100 years ago. And these well-meaning people are willing to sacrifice all of their rights, because that's what they're doing with this, in order to maintain an oppressive society that does nothing but hate them and abuse them. Because all these beliefs can be is hate and oppression. Oppression, othering, and hating are all that white nationalism is good for. Well, nationalism is good for. But until we can face this en masse as white people and actually notice that this is intrinsically the bottom line, this is the problem with our country, we can't fix anything.